All right. Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, October 27th. We are here hanging out. It's 9 o'clock if you're on the West Coast, so it's kind of morning. If you're in Central Time and East Coast, it's lunch. So hopefully you're joining us either before your workday in the lunch period, or if you're not working today and you're hanging out with us, we love that as well. So as always, this show is all about you. I have amazing guests who I'm going to be introducing pretty soon, but this show is all about you. We want to hear from you. Where are you from? What kind of OCD do you deal with? Do you deal with a related disorder like hoarding disorder, body dysmorphic disorder? What brought you here today? Any questions or any point we're talking about something that really inspires you, jump in on the conversation. We love when people are interactive and join our conversation. It makes it so much more fun. We get to make it very personal to all the viewers that are out there watching. So this is Chris's Corner. I like to think of it as a hangout where I get to invite some of my friends, some of the people in the community, either advocates or clinicians or both, that I absolutely adore, and just have a really good conversation. Some of these conversations we have on our own. And then I think, wow, this would be such a good topic to discuss with our community at large. So hopefully everybody's having a great day. I know we had the conference, we had OCD Awareness Week, and now it's kind of the calm before the holiday storm. So a couple announcements before we get started. I always want to remind you that the live stream is intended to be educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. Although we have therapists on here, they can't be your therapist. They've never, assessed you and met you, but we definitely want to give you clinical information. If you have specific treatment related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. We also want to create as safe of a space as possible and be kind and respect everyone. With that, this is being broadcast on various social media platforms. So hi to everybody on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn. I think we're on one other site. We like all of our platforms. It's being recorded, so be mindful of that as you ask personal questions or leave comments. At the end of the day, we are all here to support each other. And that's a reminder that you can watch these things as well. If you really enjoy an episode of Chris's Corner or one of Liz's live streams, Katie O'Dunn, Ethan Smith, any of the live streams, remember they're definitely going to be up on the IOCDF's YouTube page, Facebook. Make sure you like and subscribe to those so you can always get notifications and keep up on the latest episodes. So definitely go ahead and introduce yourselves. Once again, I'll be shouting you out throughout the broadcast. Definitely say hi, ask your questions. We already got Matthias from Brazil. I definitely want to go and travel to Brazil. I haven't seen if Matthias has invited us to hang out at his place yet. But I am really happy to have him here. So we'll be saying hi throughout the broadcast. Make sure to say what's up. All right, well, before I introduce my guests, I want to talk a little bit about the theme today. So once again, we will answer and discuss any general OCD-related anxiety disorder questions, comments, ideas, but we also always want to bring you a little bit of information and education. So what we're going to be talking about today is how do you turn treatment into a lifestyle? And what we mean by that is when you really think about somebody who's in shape, let's say exercise, for instance, to them, it's not something that they do. It's a lifestyle. They make choices when they eat with foods that are nutrient dense and, things that make them feel good. They're getting movement each day. They're getting out and hiking, all of that. It becomes a lifestyle for them. And then it doesn't feel heavy. It's just something they do. And this is a conversation I've had with Liz McAville and I've had with other people. When we get to that point where we are doing ERP and ACT and all of that stuff in the beginning of treatment, it feels like something you have to do and it's time consuming. But over time, the people that really have OCD and related disorders in management have gotten to that point where they're able to just have it be a lifestyle. It's just something that they live. It's a mindset that they're in. And we get to a point where we really start to thrive and really start to see our lives come together. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. And I have two amazing guests with me. My first guest is a good friend of mine. Both are good friends of mine, but as an OCD specialist who has OCD herself, Christina Orlova is passionate about helping people with OCD learn what it is, how it works, and how to overcome it. She has been in the mental health field, holding various roles for over 15 years. She has been specializing in OCD and anxiety for over 4 of those years. She is the host of the OCD Whisperer podcast, which is an amazing podcast. Podcasts are so great because you can listen to it while you're doing something and you're always going to learn something from it. So make sure you listen to that. She founded the Mastering OCD membership and runs her private practice called KOR, or Core Results OCD and Anxiety Specialist. She uses exposure response prevention, acceptance commitment therapy, mindfulness, and problem-solving strategies when working with clients. She loves to celebrate clients' wins. As she says, OCD may be tough, but humans are more resilient and than they give themselves credit for. So keep going. So Christina, it's good to see you.
You too, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm excited to have you as well. And then my other good friend, someone who I am a lead advocate with, it's Miss Valerie Andrews. So Valerie Andrews is a retired school teacher, which let me tell you, that is, woo, you have to play 86 roles when you're a teacher. My sister's a teacher, and the stories. And a full-time wife, mother, and grandmother. Following her OCD diagnosis in 2011, she began advocating in hopes of bringing awareness and inclusion within her own community and communities of faith. Today, she spends the majority of her time focusing on her new nonprofit, Miss Mabel's Sparrows, Inc., a nonprofit for women of age, color, and faith. Her goal is to continue working as an IOCDF lead advocate and promote change. So hello, Valerie. How are you doing?
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I am doing good. Good. It's good to see both of you. We already got a hi from Dave. Our good friend Justin Hughes, who's an amazing OCD therapist, says hi. Matthias invited us to his place, so let's head down to Brazil, y'all. Anthony said hi from Toronto. He hasn't offered for us to hang out in Toronto either, but I'd love to go to those. Yeah, so it's really good. We have somebody who says, hi, I've had OCD since 1994. When I was 13, I had my first assessment tomorrow for an intensive outpatient program through Gateway, where I work. So super excited about that. Carol says, hi, my light's doing something funky. There we go. Now you can kind of see me. So hi, Carol. Carol says hi and happy Wednesday. So let's jump into it. So today we're going to be talking and say hi and ask your questions throughout the live. We would love to get you involved in our conversation. So what I would like to start with, I'll start with you, Christina. You're both a clinician and someone with OCD, and we had this conversation actually last week when I was speaking with you, and we talked about OCD treatment as a lifestyle. So when you hear that, what does that first kind of bring up for you? What are your initial thoughts, either with OCD or as a clinician or both?
Well, I think as a clinician, like just this week, I was having conversations with clients when, in the very beginning, like anything, when you're just learning, you might need more of that structured approach, and you need to be able to understand and kind of slow things down. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? How do I do it? So, being really planful in how you design your exercises, and really learning much more about your own behaviors and how your anxiety shows up. And then, of course, like anything with time, you start to master it. And so then, it evolves. And I think it gets to that next place and phase where you really want to look at it as, this is not just a way that I operate and I live. A comment I think you made once, values over fear, right? So that whole concept that I want to continue to live my life. I want to continue to do things that are meaningful for me. And that means that when I do those things, like OCD is going to show up, because OCD doesn't just like take a time out because, you're now deciding to do something you feel like doing and it doesn't want you to, right? So everything you do, you start to recognize that triggers are going to be around you all the time. And so you really, kind of come to that place of making that decision. Do I really want to live my life? Even if that means that I'm going to be around triggers, or, am I going to listen to my OCD brain? And essentially, basically for most people with OCD, I think and agree that means I'm living no life. Like I'm going to be, in one room basically. And even in that room, I'm going to be triggered left and right, because no matter where you are, there it is. So, when we really understand that, and that's kind of now the conversation we're having, we'll kind of move into that next phase of realizing and recognizing, okay, how else can I really expand my practice and really make sure that I step more into the things that I actually want to do, right? The things that are actually meaningful for me, because life is short. And I think sometimes not until things happen to you, right, that you take it really seriously. Like in my case, I think if anybody who does know or has seen my posts, for example, my mom's been diagnosed with cancer right around my birthday in April. There was like an official diagnosis. It's pretty aggressive. It's advanced. So like a lot of those things kind of come up, like mortality, purpose, meaning. And I think also if you've lived long enough, you've experienced losses, you've lived, like you've gone through stuff, right? And I think, when you enter those places in life, you kind of have to make those decisions, like how else do I want to live today and moving forward? And so really having that kind of dialogue helps definitely my clients, and as well for myself, because I have these conversations with clients a lot. It keeps that front of mind in terms of being really mindful and aware of, what do I want to do? Like, do I want to send that text ultimately because I want to have an interaction, even though I know, like, my OCD might tell me, like, oh my God, but what if you just, really made that person mad if you have, that kind of OCD, or like what fear of doing something wrong or saying something wrong or offending somebody, or relationship OCD, which I definitely have that. And sometimes I get really nervous about like sending something or commenting on something, because I always have these intrusions of like, oh my God, like I did something that they're going to be mad and now everybody's going to hate me. And it just goes really catastrophic really fast, right? But I'll send it anyway. And afterwards, like, I'll feel it. And I'm just like, well, there it is. And like, okay, yeah, maybe they all hate you and they think you're the worst person on the planet Earth. And I guess that's it, right? And so you make those choices, because what matters more is connection. What matters more is making sure that I'm not just in a corner somewhere. So I guess that's the best answer I can give in the moment, in terms of both as a clinician to model that and to talk about it with clients and help move them in that direction.
Absolutely. And I like, I always say to people, it's values over fear. And what values over fear means is each day you can wake up and there's things that you were put on this earth to do. There's things that you were born to do. Some people really want to be a mom. Some people really want to be a parent. Some people want to advance us in science. Some people love sports, arts, music. And there's things that we do that make us who we are, make us unique from everyone else. And OCD will always stop that. It will always prioritize fear and being scared, and it prevents us from really living our full life. And so when we choose those values over fear, it's not an easy decision, but we start to live with that mindset. Beth, by the way, says she's sorry about your mom. So thank you, Beth. That's sweet. Stuart, hi, and Michelle. I want to ask you the next question, Valerie, and it actually comes from a comment I'm going to say West Coast time, because I'm always bad at doing the time change for you, Jess, with the IOCDF. But Ashley makes a comment from Louisiana and says, I agree that with the title that OCD is chronic, so treatment should mirror that. Not always in a formal way, you can be your own clinician with support. So Val, when we talk about treatment as a lifestyle, one thing I always say to my clients as a therapist is I'm trying to get to a point where you don't need me anymore. I'm not a company like a bread company and I want you to buy my product for life. I want you to get to a point that you can go out there and sort of be your own clinician. So with Ashley's comment, knowing that OCD is something that's going to be with us, how did you get in that mindset to make OCD treatment a lifestyle so that you could really make sure that you were being your own therapist and you were living each day to your values versus what OCD was demanding from you?
Excuse me. It's kind of what Christina said. I just got to a point, and I always say, especially being older at 65, I had to really look at my life and decide, how was I going to live the rest of it? Was I going to live in fear? Because my OCD had come to a place where it was horrible. It was out of control. I had been spending a lot of times in all types of classes, CBT, and I was doing my OCD group. I was seeing my talk therapist, and it just became overwhelming. And I remember my psychiatrist said to me, when are you going to start living? You're spending all your time here. When are you going to start living? And that kind of resonated, along with my therapist asking me kind of the same question. But I think that had a lot to do with it. And it had a lot to do with what kind of life I wanted to live, what I wanted to do in that time span. And so that kind of was the catalyst. And Christina touched on something which I really didn't realize was so much a part of my OCD. And I don't think I've ever shared this with people before, but I lost my father when I was 24. And and it was very quick. He went to the hospital and was like dead 18 hours later. Mm. And I think that experience, even though I consciously didn't realize it, pushes me forward, because he was 47 And so, and in my eyes, he did a lot in that time. You know, he raised 6 beautiful kids. He was a great dad and husband, but I wasn't feeling like I was living and enjoying life. And so I had to make the choice, and I made the choice to, like you say, do the work and just go day by day. And, you know, that was my beginning part.
I want to do a follow-up with you, Val, and then I'm going to throw it to you, Christina, because you both talked about really difficult moments in your life. One of the things that I hear from a lot of clients, and I think I, experienced in my own life, is we want to live treatment as a lifestyle. We want to do ERP. We want to get better. How do we navigate that, Val? So you're talking about, with your father. How does somebody navigate that treatment as a lifestyle mentality when they're going through something really horrific or a really difficult time? Because sometimes people want to say, time out, I can't do this ERP thing. It's just too tough. I'm going through life. So how do you still navigate treatment even when life was difficult?
Well, that was long ago. That was prior to my diagnosis. But I think now I do it because when things get hard, I look at, like you say, my values. I was missing a story. I hadn't flown in like almost close to 25, 30 years out of fear. And I was missing out. My husband and my family were going to, events out of state. I had 2 sister-in-laws that were flight attendants, plus my son was a flight attendant. So, I was being left all the time. And it just came to a point where I had to decide what else was I going to miss, and I would sit there and you would hear the stories. And for me, it was always difficult once they went to Hawaii and left me. Once they got to Hawaii and I'm talking to them, there was so much guilt and shame, like, boy, I couldn't do that. And so I had to kind of decide what was more important. Was I going to miss out on all of these activities, or was I going to let my OCD tell me to sit at home? And it was hard. It took a lot of work. It didn't happen overnight. Like I said, it just made a conscious decision in the moment to do it. But that kind of keeps me going. You have to look at I try to look at the things that I have as a point, as an opposite of what I don't have. And I just try to lean onto those factors. But like I said, I didn't realize how much my father's early death has made me realize, like Christina said, time is short.
Absolutely. And
So
Christina,
that's how I kind of keep going.
Yeah, thanks, Val. And I'm going to throw that same question to you, Christina. So when we're talking about treatment as a lifestyle, what we're asking people to do is to have an ERP mindset. And the way that I like to think of treatment is it's going after those fears. And we know that works because since we're a little kid, everybody tells us, face your fears, face your fears. How does somebody do that, though, if they're having a really difficult life moment? Sometimes it can be good things. They're getting married, or they're moving or traveling. Or in your case, and when Val was talking about earlier, it's a family member sick, or somebody loses their job, or their car gets totaled. Like, how does somebody keep up ERP even in those difficult moments?
Yeah, so if anybody knows me, they know I like to be brutally honest and direct. So the reality is sometimes you do need a timeout. You do need a moment to just right? Like, let me just breathe for a second and just, right? But it's always a balance. So it's taking that and then saying, okay, there's a time for that pause, and there's a time I have to push a little bit. And the reason I push a little bit and I'll challenge myself is because I understand the anatomy of my brain. I understand the anatomy of my OCD. I get it. Like, I get that if it gets really sticky, if I don't respond a certain way, it'll get more sticky, and like rapid fire, everything will escalate and will fly out of handle. So best thing is to give 2 examples. So recently, right when I'm, doing sessions and there's something happening socially, and of course my lovely ROCD that just, takes little breaks here and there, decides to walk in the room again, and I am triggered through the roof, and I'm again sitting here having catastrophic thoughts that now everybody hates me because I said something and people didn't agree, and etc. So I'm having to literally, I tend to still go to my sessions, and then show up and deliver, right? But I'm also having my anxiety. And, I always say I love Post-its because I'm writing my little narrative on my Post-it. And before a session, I'm sitting reading my narrative. I have it on my laptop. After sessions end, I'm reading my narrative, back to the next session, then reading my narrative. And that's sometimes how you do it, is you literally just jump in and do it because, I know what's on the other side if I don't do it. The other element, like with my mom, when this first came, we had to go to Reno in June for the first phase of her treatment. And I caught it kind of midway, but I was already in it. And I didn't realize until I was realizing I was starting to kind of compulsively exercise. Like I felt like I have to go. I have to now make sure everything is clean and I'm drinking water and I'm eating only vegetables and everything's leafy greens and, and I kind of, when I realized that was happening and that I was getting panicky if I didn't, immediately midstream had to catch myself and stop and go, okay, like you're gonna go buy a damn M&M and have an M&M, and that's just what you're gonna do today. And you know what? I actually like M&Ms with peanuts, so there you go. And so kind of making it in a way where I can also have a little fun with it, and I always say this with a lot of awareness to people, like when you really grasp what your thing is, I think it's okay to have a little lightness sometimes and sense of humor with yourself, because it's not always like that. But sometimes, like in this moment, like I stopped myself and I was like, Christina, what are you doing, girl? You're going way out there. Like, get a damn M&M, and I was able to laugh and kind of bring a little lightness to that moment, and then I was able to kind of stop that and say, okay, like we're going to chill out on this exercising situation. And yes, eating clean is good. And yes, all that stuff is good, but also it is okay to enjoy things a little bit. So I kind of had to have that inner dialogue and redirect myself. And that's literally how it happens. But to get to that place, which is what, Valerie, you were just mentioning as well, like that takes time. That means you have to do the work, right? Doing the work means you have to actually practice those things so you get to that place, right? People want the outcomes without doing that's like, you can't bypass that process. If you want to get to that outcome, you have to do these things here in between. You want a bicep, you don't go do 5 push-ups and go bam, right? You have to keep doing it. You have to keep doing the work so that you can then say, oh, look at that. There you go. Like a muscle is building, right? This is also a muscle. So just like that, emotionally, we have an emotional muscle. So you have to build to that place, and then you get there, and then just like that, with now so much more awareness and knowledge, you get to catch those things as they're happening, and then you get to make choices, which is the most beautiful thing, because that's the power of ERP, is you suddenly realize where you do have power, and the powers and the decision you get to make with what you get to do about the situation you're in, and you do get to decide, right? But you have to practice to build that muscle so you can get there. Now, is it always like that? No, because sometimes we all know, I'm sure with Valerie, with you, I'm sure with you, Chris, like you have moments where a city just takes you over like a tsunami and you're just caught in the waves and you're like, and then suddenly you're like, oh, wait a second, right? So sometimes that happens too. So it's not like it's always you catch it all the time. Sometimes the reality is you might be in it and compulsing a little bit. Like in the first example I gave, when I had to still, show for sessions, I was in it for a good, I think, half an hour to an hour almost before I realized, oh my God, I'm mentally doing a lot of compulsive rumination right now. Whoa, stop. And then I went, oh my God, where's my Post-it? And I started writing my narrative, right? But like for a good 30 minutes to an hour, I was totally wrapped in it. And it took me about that long to catch it. And then I started to practically work on it to shut it down. So that's the reality of how it looks. But the beauty is, like anything, as the more you do it, you just get better and better, and you have more trust and confidence in yourself and in the process. And you will come out on the other side.
Absolutely. Well said. Jess, I'm going to jump to a question oh yeah, Val.
I was going to add on to what Christina was saying. Chris, 2 things. I know for me, I learned to celebrate every time I even thought about going to ERP, or I thought about, leaning into what was happening. I would celebrate just the fact, I tried to not put too much guilt and burden on myself. But in hindsight, I think what really, really keeps me going is because I know how it feels where I can't go back to. And I know before my diagnosis, we all had a life and, a happy life and we remember all those good things pre-OCD. And so that kind of keeps me going, that I don't want to go back to where I was, but I want to move forward. But in order to do that, I have to consciously think about choices and make decisions, hard decisions. And I'm like you, oftentimes I fail. That's just part of being human. But I just had to get to a point where I decided, okay, I'm going to pull myself up. Even though I might have went 2, 3 days being over here in this gloom and doom, but now I'm going to get back doing the work, because I know how it feels to feel good and not have, all the intrusive thoughts and, all the stuff that goes with OCD on the continuum, so that's really, I think, a lot of my motivation, is I know
Yeah,
how it feels both
exactly. And I
ways.
like that you said that. It's reminding yourself, just when you're at those low moments, it doesn't feel good to do the compulsions. I always remind clients that giving into the compulsions is miserable. Doing the ERP can be miserable too, but at least ERP, there's an end date, whereas being miserable with OCD, there's no end. So, Val, I'm going to throw it back to you. So we got a question at 9:07 a.m. from Janice,
Mhm.
and it says, "My son has started, CBT ERP for OCD. How long does it usually take for people to grasp onto the strategies to overcome the compulsions?" So maybe, and I'll have this for both of you, but starting with you, Val, when was it that you first started in treatment to pick up on the strategies? And then, going back to our theme, when did you feel like it was less that you were grasping them and starting to live them?
Oh, good question. Um, I have to ponder this for a minute. I don't know if I can really tell you when. It just kind of happened. Um, I've always been, I think for me, because I'm usually the oldest person there, I have all the life experience, and I was never quite shy about being transparent. So I was always like, oh, yeah, I got a question or a thought. And so that makes it difficult for me to really understand when I really, really started doing stuff, because kind of right off the bat. Um, and I think that was simply because I had a good therapist, and she knew how to pull stuff out of me. And so I think it just came along naturally. I can't say it's different for everybody. Some people, I'm sure, did it much quicker than I. Some people are still probably trying to reach to that point. Um, but I don't know. I don't know, Chris. I don't know, Janice, if I can tell you how long it will take. Just uh, I can tell you that it's worth it. You have to stay in it. You have to stay in the game, and all those things we had said before. Give yourself credit for what you're doing, for thinking. Give yourself credit for even if you fail. That's part of life, but you just have to keep moving forward, and it will click. It will click. And then the strategies, like you say, it becomes part of your lifestyle. I don't get up thinking, oh, I got to do ERP today. It's just a natural thing. And even a couple of days ago, I was kind of dealing with this winter depression. And it was like, okay, you know, deal with it for a minute and then move forward. So it's a constant. So the strategies will just kind of kick in naturally, at least for me.
Yeah, before I jump
So I
into you,
can't give you a
Christina.
time limit.
Oh, no, it's okay. Before I jump in with you, Christina, I was just thinking about it, like when you were asking the question, Janice, and I know for me, like it didn't take long for the strategies if your therapist is doing it correctly. And so it really helped me as my therapist moved at a slow enough pace in the beginning. And I always kind of use workout analogies because I used to run gyms. And, when you start working out, you're really learning the form. It doesn't matter how much weight you put on. You just need to learn the form. So eventually you know how to work out. And the more weight just is the harder you push. So for me, it was the same with ERP as I started with really small things. So an example is my first exposure ever. I used to run all of my shower products under hot water before using it to decontaminate it. So my first exposure was to shower and not run my shampoo, conditioner, and body wash under the hot water. And so when I first did that first exposure, that concept started to grasp of like, okay, I'm doing these things because of safety reasons. I know I don't really need to do it. Let's take a risk. Let's see what happens. Let's live in that uncertainty. And then we started to do that. And I think when it took me to grasp in that first or second month, I started understanding that I was getting more of my time back. So for people that are really in treatment and want to get better and want to make understanding, I don't think it takes an extremely long time. It's just a lot harder as you get to the bigger things. But if your therapist is explaining the concept of ERP, for me, like I said, the first month or two, I started to really understanding what my treatment was going to look like. What about you, for you, Christina, for the question that Janice was asking?
Well, so clinically, literature, everything says it can take up to 12 sessions usually. What I really have seen in practice when I'm working with clients, and I tell this to every client, is that two things. One is it really is going to depend on your willingness to feel discomfort and if you're open to learning something new. Because I always tell people, when they're like, well, I don't know if I'm ready. I'm like, who cares if you're ready? When are we ready for anything, right? But am I willing to experience something, right? Well, yeah, maybe I am. I'm willing to experience some level of anxiety or some level of uncertainty. So we just start there and then we build on it. And so clinically, what I've really seen is, again, depending on, in your case with your son, it's going to depend on how your son takes the information and how he does what he does between sessions. That's really where the magic happens. It's, are you actually taking those things in? Are you actually practicing? Are you going over reading things? Are you taking your time to really learn and be an active learner in the process? Because it's a really proactive therapeutic approach. It's not like we just sit and talk about something and then you're sitting waiting for the next session. It's very collaborative and proactive. And so clinically, what I've seen is really from people realistically anywhere from 16 to 20 sessions, roughly in that ballpark. And then again, like everybody's a little different. So it's just knowing sometimes, I've had some people who can get really stuck on things. So we have to really slow down and do even smaller steps. Some people want to jump really fast, a little too fast. So we have to kind of look, and depending on kind of where they're at, but rough ballpark, everything in literature and in my clinical practice really indicates anywhere between 16 to 20 about sessions. And then, of course, that's just to get that initial. And then for anything, when we're talking about mastery of skills, I think we've all known, I forget the amount, but it's like thousands of hours that you have to put in. So it's just the longer you practice over time, the more you'll get mastery over it.
Yeah, and going back to the theme of treatment as a lifestyle, and Janice, your son will learn this. For me, what really helped is once I was done with treatment is living that lifestyle. So for instance, I had OCD around some sensory stuff, and one of them was like lotions and mayonnaise and anything that had that kind of texture or feel. So for me, I was deliberately buying lotion, putting lotion on my hands. I was buying food, like I was ordering sandwiches with mayonnaise on it. So that was a lifestyle. I remember somebody I spoke with, I did a talk like this at a conference, at the IOCDF conference. And one of the speakers talked about they had hit and run OCD, and every day to work, they could go away that was kind of like, slow and comforting to the OCD, or they could take this busy road that went by two schools, and on the way to work, they were passing right when school was starting. And so for them, they deliberately took that route because it allowed them to face the OCD every single day. So when you can make it sort of like a lifestyle like that, people go from just kind of understanding it and grasping it to really living it. Val, I'm going to throw a comment to you from 918 from Ashley. They said, I have an accountability partner and other people that I know with OCD that I can text and call. It's nice to have people who totally get you, are non-judgmental, and can support you with ERP. So when we talk about treatment as a lifestyle, we want to get all of that different items and themes that can really help us live this. And I definitely think support is one of them. So obviously Ashley has an amazing tool. Was there anything for you when it came to support or accountability that really helped you live ERP as a lifestyle?
Yeah, at the beginning, my therapist, I had a therapist and then an OCD specialist. My therapist, she was more like, okay, the encouraging one, you're doing good, keep it up, that sort of thing. My OCD specialist was kind of like, oh, you said you want to get better? What you doing about it? She was kind of in my face, where it goes back to kind of the balance. And I needed a little petting a little bit, but then I needed more of a push to move forward. Now, as I, get older and I continue to live this, it's very important, I think, to have a supportive a unit of people that can help you through this. For me, my husband's still a work in progress, but my children are totally supportive, and I have a fairly good inner circle of people that are supportive. They've done the work too, as far as understanding what I'm going through. I think that's important too. You kind of have to actually know what OCD is in order to be supported, because there are things you can do unconsciously that's not helpful. We all know that, but it made a big difference in groups like this. I think for me, the best thing that has ever happened to me has been the foundation and finding myself in this position, because I take it as a privilege and an honor that I can, in my own journey, help somebody, to see that it is possible. It can happen. I know when I first started with my OCD specialist, she wanted me to meet this person. His name was James. We both had the health anxiety part of the OCD. And finally I get to meet James, and it's like, James, how long have you been seeing, Dr. Dort? And he was like, 12 years. And I'm a new patient. And my first reaction was, 12 years? It's going to take me 12 years to get where he was. And that's not true. But you have to get past all those kind of barriers. It's such a personal journey, but a journey that definitely requires and can be a lot easier when you have a support team.
Absolutely.
And I learned a lot too from reading people's memoirs.
Yeah, no, I love Jeff Bell's, is one of them that I read when I first started out. And what you were talking about, Val, is saying like this community. That's why I love Chris's Corner. That's like what, whenever I'm a guest on somebody else's live, I mean, we have people internationally. Nikki is from Ireland, but I see so many people supporting each other in the comments, and I love that. I'm going to throw a new question to you, Christina. So Stuart asks at 9:17 a.m., ERP can be so tiring. I'm happier to accept and live to values. Find it slightly easier. Is ACT a good way? Can you talk about kind of, because I think sometimes people think of ACT on its own as like a treatment for OCD, and how I usually see it is, the traditional way, Stuart, that people used to present ERP was pretty cold. It felt exhausting. It was like, wake up, do exposures, beat OCD, go to sleep, wake up. It almost felt very boot camp. But with the incorporation, like you were talking about, when I was reading your bio, Christina, like adding the mindfulness, adding ACT, thinking of treatment less of like this thing you're doing to beat it, but more so like, I want to go to the movies and I have a lot of problems sitting in public, theaters because they're dirty. This is how I'm going to do exposures at home and work up to being able to it so I can watch this movie coming out in 2 weeks. I think that helps people really have a why. So maybe can you kind of see, answer Stuart and help him find a way that he can kind of live with his values and accept it and still beat the OCD?
Yeah, I mean, this question actually comes up a lot. And I think that it's true. There sometimes can be this confusion, like, oh, I just want to do ACT. I don't want to do ERP, which I've had clients also say that sometimes. And the fact is that in order to get better with OCD, you're still going to have to do an exposure and prevent yourself from engaging in ritualistic behaviors. Or if it's behaviors that actually have a functionality that people typically do, like we all, for example, I imagine brush our teeth and take a shower. But like, let's be reasonable. Let's have a guideline of, like what that should look like, because OCD brain and compulsions will tell you like maybe be in there for 5 hours. And you want to say, no, maybe let's do it for, 5 minutes or 10 minutes and that's it. So you're still going to have to learn how to do that. Now, what ACT does, if you think of it this way, it's kind of like, a lot of it, I think mentally, it's how we frame something, how we perceive something. So what ACT helps us do is reframe this in a different way, where you realize, for example, like I tell people, and even for myself, like if I sit down to do a meditation, my thoughts are still there. It's like sometimes it can be quiet, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's still active. Sometimes it's still catastrophic. But you sit there and you allow them to be. You actually are practicing on purpose that self-awareness muscle of saying, okay, I'm noticing I'm having these thoughts. They're catastrophic. There they are. They're bombarding me. This is what it feels like in my body, and I'm just going to allow to be in that experience. So organically, even you could see how practicing mindfulness in itself already has that exposure feature, really. But when you bring that awareness to it, you're now also saying, hey, and I'm going to choose to just be in this experience and not fight it. And that's a big part of the ACT principle as well, is recognizing that when we're fighting an experience that you actually are in, you're starting to suffer, versus leaning into this concept of radical acceptance of the experience you're actually in right now. Like recently, it was really raining. I'm in San Francisco, and I'm doing this challenge, and I was walking outside at the crack of dawn and stepped into a puddle that I didn't see. And I hate having wet feet. And my sock is soaking wet. My shoes, my toes are curling, and I'm like, oh, everything in me is fighting that moment, fighting it. And then I stop myself and I'm like, Christina, but you know what? Your sock is still wet. This sucks, but open your toes, step on that foot. Okay. I really would like, walking to me is actually more important right now. So let's get back into the walking, and let's get back into, okay, what are you seeing around you? Okay, what are you hearing? So right there, that pivot was engaging in a mindful way, engaging with the senses, right? So what we're talking about here is learning how to blend and incorporate those kind of ways of how to work with yourself, so that you're not perceiving ERP like this blunt object. Okay, now I have to sit and I have to now open this thing, and I have to do, this other thing, and I have to read this, and right. It's not as robotic and mechanical like that. It is about bringing in that level of awareness. It is about bringing in this concept of, like, what matters to me more right now, and I'm going to go do that. And the fact that you are going to choose to do things that matter to you already in itself means you're going to be exposing yourself, because you're going to be bringing your triggers with you. No matter what you're doing, the triggers are going to be there, right? So it's really kind of, I think, redefining what this means to live this as a lifestyle. And what this really means is that I'm getting to, again, come back to that principle of live a life of meaning, whatever things have meaning for me, right? And I get to live that. I get to have that. And that means that part of that territory means I will be around triggers. There's no way that you can avoid triggers. There's just no way. Even if you don't have OCD, you're still going to get things that are going to be triggering. Right. So it's really reframing that and realizing that that's really globally the experience that I'm needing to embrace. Right. Not look at even like somehow this thing called ACT is going to somehow take me away from having to do exposures. It's like, no, you're still going to have to learn how to live and be around things that are uncomfortable. Right. That you don't like. But you get to learn that, one, you could do it probably a lot more than you realize, and a lot more than you give yourself credit for. That's the one thing I always notice. Everybody always gives themselves very little credit for what they can actually do. So you get to learn and see how much stronger you really are, how much more you can really do. And when you're pivoting yourself in that way, now you're adding something that has probably more value to you, right? More meaning for you, holds more importance. So you can psychologically get behind that more so. And so it makes it a little bit easier to then get into doing that work. But the key piece here is that exposure response prevention is still the number one treatment for OCD. So I love when people try to find some way around not doing it, but the reality is you're still going to have to do it. But it's just, there's different ways you can at least think about it so that you don't have to. So again, shifting your perception on something can really make a world of difference of then how you go about it. And that's where acceptance commitment therapy really helps folks reframe this in a different way, so that I think it could be a little bit easier to engage with it.
Well said. So I'm going to get to you, Val, now. Adam B has a question at 9:25 and says, it's hard to gain objectivity when you're living with a disorder. So my question is this: how can I discern what is and what is not a disorder, so I may be able to practice or self-administer ERP? So what they're asking is, like, when you're out there doing ERP treatment and you're trying to figure out, how do you know what is OCD and what's not when you're doing self-administered exposures, which we want people to be doing, living that ERP lifestyle?
Well, that could be tricky, because I know sometimes you want to blame OCD for everything. Oh, I'm feeling bad, OCD, I don't know. I think it's just when you're living with it, you kind of start understanding what is OCD and what is not. Usually with OCD, it's not going to be anything you normally would want to do or say. If that helps, it's the opposite of what you might be feeling. I don't know. I'm not sure if I could answer that for her. How do I determine what's not the disorder and what's not? I just do. And I'm not sure I always get it right. So I'm kind of perplexed on that one. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think what happens is we start to know. I mean, I always, because I am a therapist, but also live with OCD, I've gotten to a point where I know when something's OCD, and I try to lie to myself, not now, but when I was like really going through my worst of it, oh, this is dangerous, so I guess I should do this to be safe. But I recognize that nobody else in my community, nobody else in my family was doing those things. It was this thing that I was doing. So to me, what's important to know what is OCD and what is not is start to know your triggers, know what situations for you have OCD in it. So if you have hit and run OCD and you get home and you're like, nope, today it feels different, I don't think it's OCD, I think it's real that I need to go back out and check. Pause for a second. If your OCD is around hit and run, it is likely to be OCD. Let's pause for a second. Also, OCD is very urgent. It wants you to drop everything and focus on that and do nothing but that. It's repetitive. It can come up when something didn't even happen. You can get a thought about harming a family member and think I can't go to Christmas this year because I might harm them. Whereas with somebody who doesn't have OCD, there has to be a real life situation that comes up. And I always tell people at the end of the day, it's better to be safe than sorry. So practice, just assume it might be OCD, do the ERP and see what happens. If it ends up not being ERP, you learn from that as well. But with OCD, it's always around your triggers. It's urgent. It's relentless. It's both thoughts, it's feelings. Nothing's really going on around you, but it brings up those feelings regardless. And that's how we start to know, like, wait a second, this feels like OCD.
Yeah, and if I can jump in on that, one thing too that I've noticed for myself personally, and also something I do kind of teach and talk about, is that sometimes because so I have a couple of different subtypes. One of them happens to be relationship OCD, which is not always regarding my intimate partner. Sometimes it's in my friendships. It's around other relationships. So sometimes because of that, and that's, we're relating with people all the time. Sometimes it feels very real. And I literally myself cannot tell, wait a minute, but maybe I did actually mess up, or maybe something is happening. So one of the key indicators too is I always connect to the body, what's going on in the body. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect that people have there, and you have to kind of tie those together, which is am I starting to feel that familiar feeling? Because OCD, like I always say, it's got this familiar cracked out feeling. It's a really a familiar kind of consistent thing. It hits and it's like, ugh, right? It's like in your gut or it's in your chest. Like for me, I feel like somebody's getting in there, turning my heart, and I'm like, oh my God, and your brain, everything starts to go really fast. You're like, holy moly. And you feel really unsure. Your anxiety is ramping up, right? So those are ways that physiologically you can clue in something's happening here, right? And then, like you just said, Chris, then you start to immediately have the sense of urgency, I have to check, or I have to go do this, or I have to figure this out, right? So there's this immediacy and this urgency that you get around it. So you want to learn how to recognize that. And again, and if you're in the moment, like you said, which sometimes people do say this too, that they feel like somehow this one is different. This time, this one. And like you said, and even and especially at those times when it feels like this time and this one is different, especially then for good measure, just do your ERP, right? Because there's no bad side effect to it. I don't know anybody who's had a bad side effect from ERP other than in anticipation of it, you get freaked out and everything's catastrophic and ugh. But then once you do it, I'm sure Valerie, you're smiling, so I'm pretty sure, right? Like all of us, once you do it afterwards, you're like, whoo, okay. You come out on the other side and you learn something and you go, oh, wow. So, even if you're not sure and you can't discern, I would say don't get stuck on that. Focus on administering it and going for it and learning, right? Like I said earlier, focus on your openness to learning and your willingness to feel discomfort. And the rest will take care of itself.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't realize I could say that I just know. You just come to a point where you just know. So I didn't want to steer anybody wrong. So that's kind of why I said, I'm not sure I can answer the question, but
No worries.
I
I'm
just
gonna throw.
know.
I'm gonna throw another question then at you, Valerie. It just came at 9:48 from Felicia.
Mhm.
I'm about to enter a partial program to treat severe OCD. I can't stop feeling guilty and like I don't deserve treatment. Is this common? And how can I reframe this thought? So, did you ever have that feeling like I don't deserve it or I shouldn't get treatment? And how did you deal with that?
Yes, I did, but I didn't realize I was operating from that place where I didn't feel value and I didn't deserve it. It was actually when I did a partial program um, that that therapist pulled me aside and said that she felt that I was trying to, I kind of got to tell you the backstory. On my second day, and this was a very small group, it was like 8 of us. On my second day, I came bearing gifts, for everybody. Now, these are strangers, and, you know, um, I bought mugs and I bought journals for everybody. And I felt really good about it. And I remember my therapist after the group leader after the therapy pulled me aside and said, why are you doing this? You barely know these people. You're such a uh, person pleaser that you find your value in other people as opposed to yourself. And I'd had to look at that because I didn't realize I did feel guilty. I'm taking this time away from my kids. I'm taking this time away from my marriage. It's hard. I don't want to be here. They're wasting my time. I'm not getting better. All of those things were kind of swirling around. Uh, and I just got to a point where you have to say you're worth it. And for me as a Christian, I always go back to uh, the scripture that tells us we're more valuable than sparrows and all the birds in the air. It's just getting to a place where you recognize that you're unique, that you're special, you're the only one of a kind, and you should not feel guilty for wanting to get better. Pat yourself on the back. That's a good thing. But I went through it, so I just try to reframe the thought and say I'm worth it. What's the alternative?
I love it. Very
Who
well said.
cares?
I really like
You
it.
know?
Very well said. So we have about 8 minutes. So what we're going to try to do is some rapid fire answers. So we're going to shorten our answers, get those out so we can get to everyone. Anthony asked at 9:26 a.m. or 12:26 a.m. Christina, can you elaborate on your post-it narratives? How do you use that as a tool? And Matthias wanted the answer to that as well.
If you know what a narrative is, so you'll hear words like imaginal exposure, scripts, narratives, all means the same thing. So it's essentially where you take a fear thought that your brain already produced, right? So we're not working with something out of thin air. We're working with things that the mind is already generating. And you write out your worst feared outcome in first person, present tense. And the goal is to actually address that catastrophe. Because if you don't, what happens in OCD is you're starting to ruminate, you're starting to mentally try to solve this riddle and somehow figure this out. So instead of doing that, you want to actually write it in that fashion. And then the reason I say post it, because you can do it in a notebook, you can do it wherever you want, but sometimes when I'm stuck in something, I literally will write out my worst feared outcome, which in this example was that, so-and-so hates me, they're all judging me, and blah, blah, blah. And the worst fear was that everybody's now rejecting me, will never talk to me again. And I'm completely losing this whole friend group, like all of them. So I literally wrote that because that was my worst feared outcome and that rejection. And then I would read it over and over. So the goal of any narrative or imaginal exposure is once you write your fear thought and you allow yourself to have that bad thought on purpose, you want to be having it multiple times throughout the day. And the more you practice doing it, it gets easier to then not mentally ruminate on it or analyze it or think about it or try to go check my phone and see if, how people are responding or is anybody sending me anything. And so as you do it, your brain starts to recalibrate and it starts to get used to that thought. And then you realize, oh, it's not as dangerous. So that's something you can do on a Post-it. Also, sometimes I'll have folks, like if there's, let's say, a hot word, you can write it on a Post-it and you can start putting Post-its all around you. So you're kind of surrounded by the hot words. So that's a way to use it. That's a nice, quick, simple, easy tool.
Well said. I'll take the question at 12:37 a.m. from Mary 1120 says, will ERP work for real event OCD when it comes to accepting uncertainty? My main fear is that I will hurt or I'll feel guilt and shame over the way I've hurt people in the past. And they go on a little bit more, but real event OCD is basically an event has happened. Most of the time it's happened in the past, the farther past, and you can't remember all the details. And you feel so guilty about it. You feel a lot of shame, almost more than the anxiety. And you keep replaying the past and you try to get certainty. Was I a bad person? Did I hurt these people's feelings? Do they forgive me? Just like ERP works for everything, it works for real event OCD. What we have to do in that moment is let go of the past, not trying to figure things out. So it's a lot of letting go of mental compulsions, not ruminating to try to remember the past event, not trying to get certainty if anybody is mad at you or hates you or is angry or anything like that. It's saying, you know what? I'm never going to get certainty over how other people feel about me and how people feel hurt. And if I try to by asking them and texting them and calling them, it's just going to bring up more uncertainty. So whatever happened in the past, I have to release it. Make sure that you're not using self-criticism and you're not punishing yourself, because those are common compulsions as well. People will, beat themselves up and put themselves down in kind of like a reaction to that. So you want to make sure that you don't do that, because a lot of times people will punish themselves and say, well, I'm not going to make friends or go out because I'm such a horrible person. So definitely don't do that. The next question for you, Val, it's at 9:48 or 12:48 a.m. from JB on YouTube. It says, I'm unable to implement ERP for some reason. I've already reacted and my brain is not giving me any room to do ERP. So a lot of times we hear that people feel like they can't do ERP. Did you ever feel that way, and how did you overcome that? Because usually people can do ERP if they have the right therapist, they understand it, it's done in a way that connects with them. So how did you deal with that sometimes when maybe you just felt like too much is going on in my brain, I can't do it?
Yeah, I went through that, especially when I was doing my ERP. I got to a point where I just felt I was wasting my time. Well, my ERP centered around my health anxiety. And I started off sitting in waiting rooms at the hospital. I had a big fear my biggest fear was getting cancer. And I couldn't even say the word. And kind of what happened to speed things up, I got to like day, I want to say 25, 26. And I decided, okay, on this day, I'm going to go sit in the cancer center. And it ended up being too much. And I realized that. So come day 27, 28, it was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I was trying to go from a baby step to the top, I think, in my ERP, because I was doing it independently. My HMO did not supply a therapist to walk me through it. And I just got to the point on day 29, like 2 days later, it was like, I'm not throwing all this work away. I'm not going to let my fears stop the progress that I have made so far. I just wasn't willing to do it. And so I kind of had to push myself through it to take the next step. And somewhere along the line, it just becomes much easier, becomes more natural. You can really start seeing the progress. But you kind of got to move that brain along, if that makes sense. It's going to be hard. And like I said, I had to realize I was moving too fast. It's okay to step back. It was not okay for me to stop. It was okay to step back and take a breather. But for me personally, it was like all that work, I'm not going to start over again, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. So you got to kind of keep your focus there. It will
Really
happen.
well, absolutely well said. So we have about a minute left. So I'm going to give both of you the floor. What is a final kind of 30-second thought that you want to leave everybody with when we talk about this idea of ERP as a lifestyle? I'll start with you, Christina. What's kind of like your final thought for everybody?
Well, I think the main thing is not to forget to put OCD in context of your upbringing and kind of, things that were important to you when you were raised. Like I'm from Ukraine and then coming to the States, like there's different things and how I was raised there versus here. So, when I put all of that together and I understand my OCD in its full context, it becomes a lot easier than to realize like, okay, these things are going to keep coming up, but I get to be the deciding factor. I get to be the one that actually ultimately makes that choice of how I'm going to direct it. And committed action, right? That's part of acceptance commitment therapy. Is the reality is when you make a decision to commit to taking an action step, your brain will follow suit. Like you actually have to give your brain direction. You have to say, okay, guys, we're going to go do this, and then everything else will start to follow. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I always say everywhere, keep going. Even when you have a setback, it's just a setback. Keep going. Go again, right? Because at one point it shifts and changes, and then you're going to feel so good. It's such a rewarding experience.
Yes.
Beautiful. How about for you, Val? What's that final thought you
Yes,
want to
I
leave
just
everybody with?
want to concur with Christina. To stay encouraged, I'm with Christina. It will happen. It's hard, but it's so worth it. I cannot stress that enough. To going back when I said, I remember how it feels to be on the other end, and I know how it feels to be on this side of the fence. It is so much easier. You can breathe. You can live your life. It's manageable. All that hard work will pay off. So just stay encouraged. And like I said, pat yourself on the back, even for I'm thinking about going to ERP. That's a plus because yesterday you didn't think that. So keep using those little baby steps. They'll add up.
Mm-hmm. I love
Thanks,
that.
Val. That was beautiful too. My final thought, and it kind of addresses one of Mary's later questions. People will always say, well, how am I going to get rid of this? I'm going to feel this feeling of shame and guilt and anxiety forever. That's why treatment as a lifestyle works. You decide you're no longer going to engage with the OCD, regardless of that worst threat. Mary, it's going to tell you you're going to feel guilt and shame forever. Let it say that. It is your job to teach your brain to stop, and you stop by letting it go, turning around, focusing forward, and living your best life. And that's what the three of us are doing. I want to thank my amazing, beautiful, and sweet guests. Of course, my fellow lead advocate, Val Andrews, Christina Orlova, who's an incredible therapist and a great podcast host. Make sure to check out OCD Whisperer podcast.
Yes.
If you have any questions for my guests today and want to talk to them, if there's anything they said that you want to further communicate with them, definitely email the IOCDF. Their email is info@iocdf.org, and we'll definitely distribute that email to them. So if there's anything Christina said or Val said they have further questions on, please email the IOCDF and we'll get that email to them. Really quick, some final thoughts. Join the Peace of Mind virtual community at iocdf.org/peace of mind. There you can view the live stream schedule, submit topics and questions for future events. We listen to those. Make sure that you definitely go to the iocdf.org for any information, info@iocdf.org if you have an email for us. Make sure to like and subscribe. And my final thank you is to everybody who joined today. This community is incredible. You are supporting each other from all around the globe, and we would not be Chris's Corner if it wasn't for all the comments, questions, and interactions from everybody today. We love you. We love this community. Hang out with us at the IOCDF, and we'll be back with another Chris's Corner in 2 Wednesdays. Next week, you'll see Liz's lovely face. Thanks, Val. Thanks, Christina. Thanks, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye, Christina.